Hello, YouTube.
Hey.
Okay, so quick recap from last week. This here sent in the center is our scene view, and it's like a quick, like, it's a representation of what our game will look like, and like where all the sprites are laid out and what all you have. And that's really useful because unlike in some programs where you might not really have a good way to visualize what you're doing, with games, generally there's a pretty big visual aspect to them, unless you're doing something like really gimmicky. So, a scene view helps show you where everything is, but also can be really easy to like lose something. So, over here on the left, we have every item that's in our game listed. And if we want to make a new item, we right click or we can click edit, no, game object. And then we can go to 2D object, sprites, and pick a shape that you think is cool. I think squares are cool. And that's how you make like a basic player sprite. I'm going to delete that because I've already got a player. I don't want two players. I just want one. And then over here on the left, obviously that's a list of everything. And when you click on something over here in the hierarchy on the left, you get the inspector, and the inspector will tell you all the information about what your player has. Hmm?
Mhm.
Thank you, Charlie. Okay. Uh, so the inspector will have a list of every item that's currently on your game. So when you have a new square, it's gonna look something like this. Some things that are important. It has a transform. A transform is basically a point in 3D space, which you can control using these three. So if I want it specifically to be at 5, 0, wow, now it's at 5, 0. Um, and then if I want to add components, I click this add component button, and that'll make it a little bit more interesting. Unity has a whole bunch of different types of components. And that was something I was hoping to go into a little bit more detail right about now. But the most crucial, I would think, is a rigid body. A rigid body basically allows you to use physics, like laws of physics, on your thing. So it allows you to add like velocity to the thing that you have, acceleration, gravity, stuff like that. We're going to be using a dynamic rigid body, and I'm going to go into what that means in a couple minutes. So you just click and it adds it automatically. And then if we want to add a custom component, add component, scroll all the way to the bottom and it says new script. Click that, then you can name it. I'd recommend you name it top down player movement because one thing I went and did is if you go to the resources tab, wow, I have this thing here that says GitHub link for Unity 2D tutorials. So anytime that I make a script, I put it on the GitHub, and that's totally legal for any competitions we do or anything like that. So it looks like this, and you can click this. And as long as you have um, a new C# script that's named the same way this is, then you can just copy and paste this and it'll work. Um, and if you want to know more in detail what exactly is going on here, please go back and watch the previous video. But it's pretty similar to Java or other like C++ languages like that. It's got functions that have return types. It's got if statements. You can use math. Um, you got parameters. It's pretty much the same thing. Lines have to end with semicolons if there are statements. You can import things using using. Um, so that's all pretty basic. I did not add in a ton of comments into this code. I'm probably going to do that later. But that's the like really quick recap of what I went over last week. Is just you can make a sprite and you can add some components to it. And we were able to make the player move. I'm going to real quick make the player faster because it was really slow last time. To run your game, you press play up here at the top. And now any script that you have written in your like any scripts that you have start running. Any movement and input capabilities that you have programmed will work. So I'm hitting the left and right arrow keys, and wow, the player can move left and right, or I can move up and down. One thing that we added in last week also is I can click and the player will move there. Wow, we've got movement. I can change things. So if I say, wow, the player's moving really fast, I don't like that, and I want the player to move slower, I can change that by using these public variables. In this case, they're public floats, I think. And now you can see the player is slower. Or I could say the player's really slow. I want them to move really fast. Hello, I'm just doing a really quick recap. Now you can see the player's way faster. And this is still obviously in the testing thing because you can see the play button is still blue. Unclicking that will allow you to save again, but it'll revert to whatever, like when you unclick the play button, it'll revert to whatever it was before you started the test. So if you realize, like, oh, well, I liked it when it was really slow and I want to change that to 2 and 2, you got to remember that that's something that you changed during the test. Otherwise, you'll have a tricky situation and be frustrated. Also, try not to change too much while in testing for that reason. Ask me how I know. Um, right. So, with that recap out of the way, welcome everyone. Let me make sure that the recording it is getting audio. I hope. Hi again, it me. I'm Tor. I'm the vice president of the Game Builders Club, and these are the 2D Unity tutorials. Today's theme is collisions. This is how your player interacts with the world. I have some basic uses. You know, ooh, I run into the power up and I pick it up and I have a power up now. Or, ooh, I run into a door and now I'm in a different place. Ooh, I run into an enemy and now I'm dead. You guys have played video games. So, rigid bodies are how physics applies to the game object. A dynamic rigid body is the most complex type because it allows for, I forget the exact term, whether it's collisions or triggers, but a dynamic rigid body is what you want to be using for your player, is the basic way to put it. It's most complicated, so you don't want to have like you don't want everything to have a rigid body, a dynamic rigid body, because again, it is the most complicated type. If something is static, it won't move, and it'll still allow you to collide with it. So that's what things like the ground is going to have. And a kinematic rigid body, it's faster because it removes some of the functions of a dynamic rigid body. But one of those is it no longer allows for collisions. So if you have, like, I don't know, a pretty bush, and you want the bush to, like, shake a little bit in the wind, but you don't actually want the player to collide with it, that would have a kinematic rigid body. Does that kind of make sense?
Mhm.
You can either put that in chat or unmute. And do I have any questions thus far about rigid bodies? Did I explain it well enough? Can I get a thumbs up in chat if anyone's alive? Okay. All right. All right. At least two people are alive. That's good enough. Um so yeah, rigid bodies very very important. And then a collider. And this is a combination between the collider game object and what type of rigid body you have. So in Unity, when you're adding components to your game object, you might see, oh, that says that it's a square collider. I have a square player, so therefore that's what I'm going to use. And then you might be confused, like, hey, why doesn't the square actually like do things? Well, it's because it doesn't have a rigid body. So um, there are three types of colliders, and this is different than when you add component collider. The component colliders are different based upon what types of shape they are. But in terms of like physics colliders, it's going to be the combination of having a collider plus having a type of rigid body. So a static collider has a collider, like it has a hitbox, but it doesn't have a rigid body. A rigid body collider has a collider, and um, but it doesn't have a kinematic rigid body. And I believe you guys can read. I hope. Um, but basically, there are three types: static, rigid body, and kinematic. And Unity has published a couple of. Oh, okay. I'll get into the charts later as to how those particular types of rigid bodies interact with each other. Um, when you're writing scripts, Unity has two, I guess, built in functions that you can call. One of them is on collision enter, and this is the most basic kind of event, like stopping movement. And then there's on trigger enter, which is usually used to change something. Uh, I don't even know really how to describe the difference between these two, other than collision enter is going to happen the very second that the two encounter each other, while on trigger enter is going to call every single time that they're touching, I guess is the best way to say it. So if I have like, I don't know, a healing hot spring, I don't want to use on collision enter because that's going to keep track of just when I enter the healing hot spring. But if I use on trigger enter, then for every frame that I'm in the hot spring, it'll do stuff. I think is the best way to describe it. I generally use on trigger enter to keep track of like power ups and stuff, and then on collision enter to deal with the ground. And here's the handy dandy chart that Unity has published. If you just look up Unity rigid bodies, I believe this is available. This is the collision chart. So there's two different charts, one for triggers and one for collisions. And depending on what types of colliders you have, you can see whether or not it'll actually register that as actually working. So I have like a I have a rigid body collider on my player. So that means I will be able to interact with any type of rigid body. I believe it's the best way to say that. Generally, you only look at these charts if something is not working and you're trying to debug, like, hey, why can't I encounter the coin? Oh, it's because I put a kinematic rigid body collider, and my player's also having a kinematic rigid body collider. And because of that, they aren't actually keeping track of things. Please ignore these red circles. I forgot to delete them. Um, or yeah, I'll delete them now. But this is the trigger. Um, and the difference between whether it's a trigger collider, whether it's a regular collider, is just whether you're using on collision enter or on trigger enter. And this is a lot of just like you just kind of you just got to kind of know this stuff. Um, the reason why there are distinctions between it is like to make your games run faster because if everything has kinematic rigid or if everything has like the dynamic rigid bodies and everything is doing all of the calculations and everything is, you know, laggy as hell. Um, do you guys have any questions? Go for it. For those who can't see chat because you're watching the VOD, Tyler has asked, er, said that he has a question and is currently typing that. Hmm. And you just copy and pasted it and used it like you just copied and pasted directly from the GitHub? The question was that he's used the player movement script and added it to the sprite, but it continues to move even after the arrow key is released. Is that supposed to happen? The answer is no. Okay, and you have a dynamic rigid body on the player? Yes. Spicy. Okay. I am gonna get back to that because I want to finish getting through the slides for the people who are watching the VOD and are gonna presumably click off in about 10 seconds, judging by the retention rate that we have on the YouTube channel. Um, so I'll get back to you on that. Okay? All right. Another thing that we can do in Unity is we can add tags to different things in the game. So as you can see, I've got two like coins here. Um, in Unity, I could either make every single coin and make make the player have like a if I collide with okay, that's fine. So I can tag things like I can tag every single coin the same way and say if I encounter the coin, delete the coin and add one to our um, coin count. Um, basically, you know, this coin essentially functions the same way as this coin because I can reuse code by tagging everything the same way Or I can tag every enemy and say this is an enemy and I should not be able to enter the enemy. Um, all right, so this is like the basic functions on how to make a coin. I'm going to make a circle sprite, going to add a static trigger collider, going to tag it as a coin and add that to the player movement and coin script. Here's where we're going to get into our little like tutorial section, or like actually going over this. Um, okay, so like it just keeps going. What do you mean it keeps going? Like, does it keep doing this little slide thing that I don't know? What? What's a vid RQ? Oh, okay. I mean, I'm currently recording this, and I'm gonna upload it to the YouTube when we're done. Okay. Oh, you mean a video of what's going on your end? So is it similar, like if you see the transform, how it's still technically moving, but the player's barely moving? Is that what's going on? Or is it something else? Okay, yeah. So if that's what's going on, I actually have no idea what's causing that. And it didn't used to do that when I wrote this script back in 2018. And I've been working on trying to figure out why that happens myself. So I will let everybody know when I figure that out. But in the meantime, it doesn't seem to actually be doing much in terms of like drastically affecting the player. I mean, it would be really frustrating if we were making like a really tight platformer. Um, but we're not really doing that, are we? We're making like a Zelda game. So, okay. We're trying to make a coin that the player can pick up. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the test because I don't want the player to continue moving. Next thing I can do, Unity already has some basic tags that I can use. So I just click over here where it says tag, and now that's tagged as player. I like that. I like that it's tagged as player. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a circle sprite. Okay. When you say that it slides for a second, do you mean like... I don't know. It's like... Okay. Because the way that it works is it says, okay, if I'm moving left, I'm going to move left. Sorry for everyone watching the VOD. Oh, yeah, that's intentional. That's how the sprite, that's how the code works, is it says like, okay, you want to be like what's it? I think it's like I'm just barely tapping the arrow key and it's moving that far. So that's intentional, the way that it continues moving after a couple seconds. And there are ways to make that tighter. And I encourage you, if the way that I wrote my script frustrates you, to go and make it work nicer for you. Okay? No, it's fine. It's fine. Um, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to name this coin and I'm going to make a tag. The way you make a tag is you click on tag, add tag, and I'm going to tag this as. Here you have the list of tags. I can hit this and say coin. And then I hit save. I go back to coin, and now I can tag it as coin. So now every coin will be tagged as coin, which will be a lot more helpful if I have more coins. Okay. Next thing I want to do is what's next on the list. So the first thing we do is we make a circle sprite. The next thing is that we want a static trigger collider. So to make a static trigger collider, I can go back to this handy dandy chart, or this one. A static collider has a hitbox collider, but it doesn't have a rigid body because I don't really want the coin to move at all. So to add that on, we go to. We can just type in Circle Collider and it'll add that in. Wow, Circle Collider 2D. And if we want to make sure that our hitboxes are real tight or whatever, you see how it has like the squares that are connected by lines. Click that button and it'll have these like green outline around, and that'll show you where your hitbox is. So you might see that it's like not exact right there. But I don't really care because on the whole, it works. So if you've got like a really interesting sprite design, you might have to have a ton of different colliders in order to make sure that each different part of the sprite is covered in a hitbox. So the sprite has a static collider. Oh, trigger collider. You click here, trigger. And now it is trigger. There we go. Trigger collider. And also the player needs a collider. So I'm going to go to square box collider. And again, I can check that, and I've got green on each of the edges, and that looks like a square, so we're pretty good. Not going to click the is trigger. So now both of these guys have colliders, and both of them are tagged appropriately. So now we're going to go modify our player movement script to make that work. So to modify a script that you've already made, you can either double click on the component or you can double click in assets. It's the same thing, so it'll do the same thing. And as I said last time, I will be using Visual Studio and C# for all of my scripts. You are welcome to use whatever you want. I don't care. Okay, so here we have our player movement script from before. And the next things that I want to do are I want to make an int, and the int is going to be coins collected. Just make sure that there isn't anything else that I need to do. I wrote notes for this one. One thing I can do in the meantime is I can go over debug.log. So debug.log is really useful, obviously, for debugging. And it'll basically spit something out to the console. So let's say I want to know whenever the player clicks. So I can say debug.log. And I can type in here. This is like a system.out.print or anything like that. So I can say player clicked. And then I save. And I go back to the game. And it's going to compile my scripts. And everything compiled. So now I can test and make sure that that works. So now I click it and I get a little thing over here that says the player clicked. So that's debug.log, and I'm going to be using that. Okay. Um, I don't really need it for that, but I would like to get a little message when I encounter um, the coins. Okay. Um, I'm going to set coins collected equal to 0. So basically, every time that I restart the test, it'll reset the coin count. And then we're going to call void on trigger enter. Because we're working in 2D, we have to specify that it's 2D. Otherwise, it's going to be looking for 3D colliders. And here in this, we can add in a parameter. And we're going to add in the parameter collider 2D other. So what this is going to do is it's going to say, okay, I entered something and it's tagged as a trigger. Um, what do? Um, so we can then specify based upon what the tag was on that object in order to figure out what we're going to do. So that is basically going to say, oh, I entered something that has a trigger collider on it. And then in order to access the tag of the other item, we're going to go to other.gameObject. And we're going to use the compare tag function. And then here we just type in whatever the tag was. So it was coin. What we're going to do is we're going to say coins collected plus equal 1. And then I want to debug.log coins equals. That is really frustrating, but that's fine. So every time that I encounter a coin, what it's going to do is it's going to increase the coin number by 1, and it's going to print out what our current coins is. So I did a little bit. Now we're going to test it, make sure that all that works. Ooh, error. Hmm? Oh, this is a plus. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Can I get a 1 in chat if you're still alive and awake?
Still here.
Right on. Okay. So you guys might have noticed a little error with my current test, and that is, oh no, the coin's still here. I'm able to get a ton of coins. So if this were, I don't know, that's not something that I generally like in a game. No. Um, is being able to pick up the same coin over and over and over again. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to um, destroy other. So basically, what that's going to do is I'm going to call this destroy method, which sounds really fun. And I'm going to destroy other.game object. And what this is going to do is it's going to temporarily delete it for the rest of the test, which is fun. That's what I want it to do. I want it to temporarily delete the coin when I pick it up. Now you can see I can go through and pick up coins. And one last thing is I have this coin here, and let's say I want to make a bunch of coins. And I could either go through and make another circle sprite and tag it the same way and add all the same components and do that over and over and over again, or I can make assets. So an asset, basically you just click and drag whatever item you have and drag it down into your assets folder, and it'll make a prefab. A prefab is just something that you already have it prefabricated and you can just make a copy of it real fast. So now I can make a whole bunch of copies of these coins. Ooh, flat coin. And now I've got a whole bunch of coins. And just to prove that they all work just like coins, they all work just like coins. And it temporarily deletes it. I stop the test and they all come back. And I've been going for about 40 minutes now, and that's generally when I wrap up. So if you guys don't have any lasting questions, that's really all I wanted to go over today. Because I try not to go over way too much all at once. Because people miss meetings and stuff, and we've all got school. Um, isn't it this method of like meetings work for you guys? I'm going to stop the recording.